Yeah, thank you indeed to have the chance to be here in Copenhagen, a city that really knows what 2025 means, what carbon reduction means. Let me start with asking you that you picture a group of kids, young kids, let's say 4, 5, 6-year-old. They play with toy cars, kneeling on the ground, they push the cars. Now imagine what you hear. Of course, some giggling. But you may also hear some boom, 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 boom. This is what you hear, or? And now think about the emotion that is triggered by the boom and so on. I'm here as a CIO, and I'm supposed to talk about capital markets, the finance industry, what do we do with green investments and the like, but I can tell you, I also need to talk with you about emotions. So keep this picture, I will come back to it. August 9 this year, and then the days after, I learned about one figure, 300. 300 as a budget figure. 300 gigatons is the mass of emissions that we can still bump into the atmosphere if we want to keep the warming to 1.5 degrees. Now we do know 1.5 degrees is important because 2 or even more degrees of warming is very difficult for us to live with, not only us humans. 300 means by 28 we are done if we continue as we have been doing the recent years. If you say, no, we do a linear reduction, we are done mid-30s. Now you may say, no, it's not 300. Let's talk about 400, 500, because this gives us more time. As a matter of fact, it's not more time. Just the likelihood reduces. 300, 80%, more than 80% likelihood of 1.5 degrees. 500, 50%, 50-50, the toss of a coin. Now, as I say, I'm here as a CIO. My day-to-day job is really to manage quite a significant portfolio. My colleagues and I, we are trusted to look for return for insurance clients, for people who want to save for retirement. Return is very important, but the risk is also very important. If somebody would approach me and say, okay, look, here is a transaction, 20% you may really lose out, I can tell you that's a transaction, most certainly, I'm walking away from. I'm not going to do the transaction. But the thing is, if it comes to the carbon emission budget, there's nothing better on the table. That's why I'm advocating 300 and nothing more. To sum that part up, I believe we actually have no reason to wait. We need to change now. Now, changing clearly means we need to change the economy. Everybody knows that. We need to change the infrastructure that provides the energy to that economy. Infrastructure that sources, infrastructure that transports, infrastructure that utilizes. Infrastructure that is really deeply ingrained into our economy. That needs to be transformed. From an investor's perspective, this is the following. We look at an investment case where once we have set up that infrastructure, we are able to provide service that is enormously competitive. Because renewable energy comes at a variable cost that is much, much lower than anything else that we can provide so far today in our economy. So that case is a textbook type of investment case. Now you may say, but wait Guy, do you actually have the means, the money? First the money. The capital markets today are awash in money. You can see this easily from the return that you may get in some areas, but you can simply read it the other way around. Money is there. The means, in terms of do we have the vehicles, the structures in place? Well, for decades, developing financial institutions, public sector organizations, private sector investors, and asset managers have come together to develop these structures and have tested this in various forms. There are very small ones, like for instance the Africa Grow e-vehicle by KfW, the German development financial institution, 80 million roughly. Of course, some private sector investors behind this, but there are huge ones. IFC, the private investment arm of the World Bank, has come up with MCPP. That's a multi-billion dollar structure with lots of private sector investors behind it, from China, from the US, also from Europe. These are just two examples, but there are many, many more. These structures fully exist. Money is there. Let me summarize this. There is no reason to wait. We can change now. Now people may say, but wait, do we have the technology? If we look into the various, let's say, consultancies who focus on this, or we listen to the Energy Transition Commission, who really looks into this very, very deeply, then we can learn if we want to bring our economy onto the net zero path by 2030, then 80% of the technology is available today. So guess what? If you want to start, there is no reason to wait, we can change now. Now you may ask, but why is it then, if we compare this net zero path in 2030, with all the commitments, so the nationally determined contribution, the private sector commitments and all the like, that experts then tell us we still may have 20 to 23 gigatons per year too many. Why is it? Well, there are many reasons. First, we have an economy. The economy is up and running. It's working. It is not only providing us a living and all the goods and stuff that we actually need, it makes quite a number of people quite wealthy. So all of a sudden, you find people who would say, wait, we may have a reason to wait and not necessarily fully change now. One thing that we really need to look into is the infrastructure that I have been talking about has a value. It sits on balance sheets. It has owners. They attribute this value to this infrastructure. Now we may come around the corner and we may say, wait, we really need to change that infrastructure. We need to retrofit it. We need to substitute it. It's getting warm behind there. This is not climate change. Yeah. They have this value, and this value may change. Now they may talk about impairment. Of course, you know what that means. That means actually a negative impact on the P&L potentially. So they really may have a reason why they cannot move now. You may think about tangible assets only, but there are also intangible assets. Remember the kids with the toy cars? Now it's not only the kids with toy cars, it's also adults with a little bit bigger cars. There's really quite something that is linked to cars. And this is an entire marketing world that we have been building, of course, yes, because we want to do business. That marketing world has a value, and that value needs to change. These are examples from the private sector, but in public sector it's very similar. Of course, also their values may change, and then all of a sudden, some forms of projects are no longer possible because of that value change of that infrastructure that needs to be changed, retrofitted, and substituted. So there are quite a number of people who may have reasons to say, there is a reason to wait, and we shouldn't change now. This is where financial institutions come in, I believe. A group of people believes. You have heard Torben. And you see actually the logos behind me. This group of financial institutions says, we can actually facilitate the necessary discussion. What does that mean? Well, first we need to really come up and say we need to be credible ourselves. So better we commit. We commit our portfolio, net zero 2050, easy. Because everybody does it nowadays, and 2050 is so far out, we can easily commit to it. Now, honestly, not that easy. But it's certainly easy if it comes to immediate implementation steps. Therefore, we said 2025 reductions must go down. That's a target that we have, and we need to work with that one. What does that imply? That implies that individuals like me and my colleagues immediately have a topic. The topic is these targets, these so-called key performance indicators, get new friends. The new friends are those that clearly define what needs to happen in terms of climate impact reduction. So climate impact becomes quite relevant, actually comparable to financial targets. That is what it means. If you have ever thought about sustainable capitalism, I dare to say a good, robust step towards sustainable capitalism is to make sustainability a target for those who make decisions in this capitalism. So this is one example I still wait to see more. The Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance that we have found is yet today the only group of large companies, I'm not talking financial institutions, companies, who have targets for 2025. And yes, I know, I'm in Copenhagen. Copenhagen knows what 2025 means, and you have done much more. You're not talking about reduction, you are talking about net zero 2025. This is something we will not get into our portfolios, but we try to get there. You may wonder, how is this going to happen? This is going to happen in the following form: the facilitation. We need to have discussions with companies, those so-called assets, the owners of the infrastructure, about long-term plans. Only long-term plans will help to get over these obstacles in the shorter term. These long-term plans need to be somehow not only facilitated, but feed into with input. That's why we reach out to academia and say, okay, can't we have a discussion about sector pathways? So what is an entire pathway of a sector that we can use? Yes, it's academic, and we need to bring it into the practical life. But this is a very good input, and a discussion that we then can have with the companies to then develop these long-term plans. In this context, you may say, but wait, how is it with green assets, with green finance? Here I must say, this is a very good area. We are all for it, to let the green capital markets, the green subsector of capital markets grow, for sure. But this is not the solution for large portfolios. Large portfolios clearly need to have long-term plans for all their assets and need to work along these long-term plans to transform these assets. For investors, again, not that big a conceptual problem. Why? Because the value, as I explained before, will grow. And this is exactly what we like as investors. Oh, we want to have assets that grow in value. That's the whole purpose of doing investment management. So this is how it actually comes together quite nicely. What we also believe, as the ones with this signal, the 2025 targets, the net zero commitment, we can talk to governments and can tell them there are policy requests. We actually have three policy requests. One is there must be standardized reporting on the carbon footprint, on company, and very important, on product level. Consumers must be enabled to decide about their footprint. We also say we must have a market-based price for carbon, one that can be internationalized, harmonized, if I may say so, across countries. Very important. Capital markets are global. Otherwise, we are in dire straits with dissected carbon markets. And thirdly, we clearly say, okay, fossil subsidies is a no game. Yeah, obviously not. If we are able to send this message, then we believe we will have more and more people, not only decision makers, but also consumers, who see that there is a vision of a sustainable, a climate neutral economy. The more people we get, the closer we get to a critical mass. We will get closer to a social tipping point. Once that social tipping point is reached, governments will follow up with kind of an inevitable policy response. And those companies that have been working on the transformation will be, of course, the first ones to position themselves in this new environment. Because the emotions play in their direction. We are not there yet. This is why we believe as financial institutions we need to facilitate this. This is a contribution that we can make. So in short, I believe net zero is not something that is inevitable. It is inevitable. Nobody wants to heat the planet forever. It is inevitable because fossil fuels simply are finite. But the big thing is, it's an opportunity. It's a big economic opportunity, and I don't want to downplay what is really in our focus, which is the planet, quite clearly. But there is this economic opportunity, we can clearly go for it. The means are there in terms of technology, in terms of investors that can support, in terms of academia looking into it and providing what solutions may be feasible and viable and can be used. And for this reason, I again would say, there is no reason to wait. We clearly can change now. Thank you. for inviting me to Copenhagen.
Thank you, Dr. Thallinger. Can you stay for a second?
Yeah.
I've been allowed to sneak in a few questions. Is that so? Before we go to our next speaker, there are so many things that this throws up. One of the questions that I was very curious to hear your thoughts about was that green capital, this is an unprecedented flow of capital into the greening economy. And the risk, or what do you think of the risk that these are clustered in particular areas, so the areas that have lots of innovation and R&D, and sort of when you analyze the data which we've looked at in some depth, is that you see that that clustering happens in sort of China, US, and Northern Europe. Do you worry that, or how do you feel that we can address that the distribution of green capital, if you will, is a bit more evenly distributed? What are the mechanisms that we have to use in order to distribute that capital a bit more fairly?
Yeah. Well, the examples that I mentioned, so the little one, KfW, Africa Grow, MCPP of IFC, the big one, this is really going in the direction of how can we really finance infrastructure development in so-called emerging markets. And I really don't like this notion, but everybody understands something of it. These structures are there, and they are tested. They work very well. What is missing? Missing is the understanding of an infrastructure plan. Pipelines of infrastructure projects, they are not there. It is in many cases that the money is chasing investment opportunities. It's not the other way around. And this is why I say financial institutions need to become much more active. They need to facilitate these plan developments. Of course, this is pro domo, clearly. But nevertheless, as this is missing, the financial institutions have to step forward in a credible form. That's why the commitment is so important.
Yeah, no, and then one other thing that you just mentioned in your presentation was the question about how consumers must be able to decide. And I know that's something we think about a lot, like how do we make these choices as individuals? What guideposts can we use, both when it comes to products themselves, and also when it comes to deciding on our pension portfolio or assets otherwise. And I'm just curious to get your thoughts on, because I don't think that's clear yet, or as clear as it could be. So how do you imagine that emerges so we all have a better insight into companies, products, and asset allocation?
Yeah. Well, I believe really, as said, we are talking about the social tipping point. I have no clue how we really reach it, when it will be there. But what I do believe, financial institutions can really create or contribute to the creation of that momentum. Again, simply because I'm the chair of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, I must say a pension product has to have sustainability in focus. This is something that consumers should really be able to rely on, while many, many other products are difficult to choose from. Such products, they should give them a means to work towards sustainability. This is one. But the other is that we strongly believe there must be a standardized reporting also on product level. Consumers must have the chance to take the information.
But you make a decision when in your asset allocation, what is green and what is not.
Yeah.
And what is transitioning and what is not. And so I wonder what guidelines you use to determine whether it is a stated target. Is it because a company has signed up to the science-based initiatives? Is it because it's verified? Is it enough to be a target, or do you have to see performance?
Yeah. Well, for investors, the important thing is it needs to reach a certain level of verification, because we need to invest against it. Science-based targets is certainly something that is enormously helpful. Now, for some, it may be difficult to actually come up with this already. Then we talk about these long-term plans that I mentioned earlier, where, yes, investors need to, what we call, engage, to really work with the companies how substantiated these plans are, and whether we believe in it and whether we can invest in it. Again, this is something that in the investment world is very well known. Very, very often, we make investment cases that exist on a plan, and then we need to follow through on it. Yeah? So there is not that this is now completely different from what investors have been doing in the past. It's not, it's just a new ambition level, and yes, of course, an enhanced focus, if something like this exists. Yeah.
But if I may drill a little bit further into that, in terms of the guideposts that you see out there, TCFD, the Science-Based Target Initiative, the various indices out there that measure companies, what do you trust? And a follow-up question to that is, where do you see this very fragmented measuring universe go, and where is it going to converge to, especially on climate? Is it going to converge towards the TCFD framework or something else? And yes, your thoughts on that would be great.
If I may come to this first, we would say TCFD, there's a very big chance that it will, let's say, focus on what TCFD is already promoting, clearly. We need, however, to talk about the carbon footprint of a company as such, to the full extent. And there, I would say, for instance, the IASB, the board that is responsible for the, let's say, international accounting standards, is working on this very intensively, together with, let's say, experts group on the EU side. So this is coming up and already kind of converging. I believe that this will actually occur quite quickly, that we have a standard with which we can work.
Well, here's for hoping. But I was struck by something that happened in the US recently. The SEC has started to request companies to file, when they file, also file on ESG metrics. And there's been some pushback because companies are worried about being held to account on things that are difficult to measure, as we know. What's your view on that? Should that be a requirement from SEC and equivalent bodies around the world?
Well, there is, of course, a discussion who should require it. This is an interesting discussion, but that there must be a standardized reporting of the carbon footprint on these two levels, company and product, is clearly something that not only I can say we believe in very, very much. The market efficiency, if I may come to this area, depends enormously on how information is provided. The current world that we have, where we do this engagement, meaning following up with companies, discuss their long-term plans, is an enormously inefficient setup. It's also limited to a very small number of companies that even very big investors can cover. And therefore, we need to come to a standardized reporting quite clearly. And as I said before, this is going to drive, let's say, the critical mass of decision makers, and most certainly we will reach a social tipping point by when it becomes simply normal. For financial institutions, by now, nobody would ever have a discussion, is it normal that they talk about their capitalization? There were times where this was very different. But by now, this is absolutely clear. Why shouldn't companies talk about their carbon footprint, clearly?
But exactly to that point, and this will be the last question before the next speaker comes on stage, the question of required reporting is something I think we're all talking about ahead of COP, right? So things that are required to report on, such as scope 1 and 2, gets reported in slightly different ways. And scope 3 is harder to measure and is not reported on as much. But it is imperative that we start measuring scope 3. What is your, do you think, and would it help your work if that was a requirement and a regulatory requirement that companies should start to report on that as well?
Yeah, the two things need to really come together. There needs to be a very, very high quality reporting on scope 1 and 2 so that we can rely on for scope 3. Obviously, in scope 3, the emissions, let's say, that come in are the ones that in scope 1 and 2 are reported in other areas, and therefore we need to really see how we can base it on a very sound foundation. clearly we need to also develop into this Scope 3 reporting also. And this, for investors, that's an enormously difficult area. Still, I would emphasize it must go in that direction.
Yes, well, thank you so much.
Thank
Round
you.
of applause to Dr. Günther Thallinger. Amazing.
Thank you.